Now is it recording? Okay. So apologies to those who just joined the recording. I thought I hit it before, but I guess I didn't. So we're just talking about the tumultuous times we find ourselves in, right? Long story short. um, but often in these sort of moments of, of crisis, it's usually where we find our greatest possibility for growth and learning and understanding. And so, um, even though there's a lot of uncertainty, I think I find myself needing to remind myself to just breathe, right? So we can take a moment to take a deep breath and breathe. Because now that we have all these pieces scattered all over the living room, we can really take the time to think about, is there a different way to play? Is this even the game we want to play? Or maybe can we make some adjustments to the game? All sorts of things are possible to us now, right? We're kind of in this blank slate moment, sort of like the Etch a Sketch. It got shook, and we find ourselves in a space of immense creativity, which is one of the things I find very exciting about this moment, right? And even concerns, I've heard, I've been having a lot of conversations with families and parents in the past 2 or 3 months, actually. And even just folks from the community with concerns, for all of our children, like this, our collective children, our, village of children, and this sense, worried about these issues of justice. One thing comes up is this notion of, kids falling further behind, right? And so I think this blank slate moment, it gives us opportunity to think about, again, what it was, what they were falling behind from. And was it in fact, something we wanted to encourage them to excel in, the nature of this game. Is this really the game we want for our children? So much of this game we've been playing, right, is really rooted in our history and our needs, from the past. And the world has changed and continues to change tremendously, right? We can just think of the span of the last, these last 4 centuries, as a microcosm. We've made tremendous sort of leaps in our understanding and consciousness and the way the world works, beginning, from our time as, mostly agrarian societies, and then moving into, a more, the age in the 19th century, sort of the age of the machine, the fruits of, for me, I feel like the fruit that we're experiencing now is in many ways the fruit of the centuries past, right? The engagement and exploration, right? We stand on the shoulders, right, of our ancestors. And but for school, even though we find ourselves, at the dawn of the 21st century, a lot of the game we've been playing has been modeled in our needs and habits from, really kind of the 18th and 19th century. We can see that, our school schedule, right, is really a holdover from an agrarian lifestyle, where you need to have the summers off because you're working the land, right? And so there's still little carryovers from that. And our structure and philosophy is very much still kind of molded in that industrial era of, a sort of mechanized approach to learning, right? But we find ourselves in a very different space. And I think, and I'm going to try and go quickly through these first slides because hopefully most of this is just familiar to you. I just wanted us all to be, kind of on the same page so we can dialogue later. Is that, we've had a shift, and we can see that represented in, in all sorts of ways in society, from how the economy works to what we value. And we won't watch this, but this, if you have 11 minutes, is a really profound, I don't know, if show of hands, anybody familiar with this, have seen this presentation of Ken Robinson's on the changing educational paradigms? Well, I'll send you the link, and the link is there. It's a fascinating look at all the change sort of swirling around in our understanding and approach to education, sort of globally as a human society, global family. So we want to, so that's sort of like the context of how we came to be where we are, right? And so we want to look at this notion of schooling, which is more what we're probably familiar with, which is really sort of that industrial model of really kind of the need to learn to be a good worker, to be a good citizen, or the origin of our public schools was in the needs for a literate citizenship, so that folks could be good citizens, right? And then we want to move to a more kind of education model, which is, and you see the word education itself is from a Latin term, which means to draw forth, to draw something out, something that's already in you, to bring it out so it can be brought to bear, right, on the society around you. And ultimately, we're hoping for this independent kind of learning, so that each person is able, fully capacitated, to bring to bear their gifts on the world, so that we can solve, some of the major challenges facing us as a community. And both, there's sort of two kind of approaches that we've had around education. And one is this sort of filling of a pail model, where students are kind of these receptacles that we pour knowledge into. And, we have usually kind of a long list of things that we've determined are important for them to have, that we want to, we want to pour in. And there's usually sort of one standard, right, that we want everyone to achieve, a standard of proficiency in this long list that we've come up with. But the other is this idea that is not new, always been around, is this more lighting a fire, right? And that's sort of the empowerment, this idea of really connecting with what's meaningful and powerful about each child, and creating a learning environment in which they can strengthen their capacities, in engagement, and recognizing that there's, I have a friend who's a professor at UNC, and he talks about, the one thing that our university system is really good at is creating more university professors. But beyond that, I don't know how effective they are. The other things, it's a very narrow kind of understanding of developing capacity of a human. It's really sort of focused on this intellectual development, right? But we know there's more to us than that. And then I say this, and these things, they can show up in any different environment. This isn't meant to be like a criticism of public school, because you can have a school can adopt either of these approaches, and you can homeschool from either of these places. I know several homeschool families that kind of homeschool from a filling a pail mode, you know, and they've got a curriculum and a list, and you know, you got to get through it. And you know, and again, it's not meant to be critical of either approach, but just to sort of share, you know, this notion of understanding. And so for me, what I've come to appreciate is this idea that, you know, education, as the word itself says, is this process that we get connected with our own gifts and capabilities, and are, you know, strengthened, right? So we work on being our best selves, right? Knowing that we're all very different, and we're each have different gifts to offer, but that we do that in the context of being able to make our communities better, right? And everyone's going to bring a little, excuse me, a little something different to that process, right? But in order to be our best selves, the essence of it for me is this sense of that we have to know ourselves. We really have to know, you know, who and what we are. And I'm going to want to go into, again, you know, I want to go into sermon mode here, but but yeah, I think for the most part, most of us derive that sense of self and identity from one of two places. One is sort of, you know, I use the word creator, but you know, you could use Mother Nature, whatever it is, that relationship you have with something that's larger than yourself, right? That informs you either through guidance or, you know, intuition or Holy Scripture, tells you who you were created to be, right? And then the other way that we learn is through the relationships that we have with each other, right? And those relationships also show us who we are. And I like this concept, I think, so much of Ubuntu, this notion that, you know, that I can't really understand who I am if I'm not in relationship with you, right? Like it's through my relationship with you that I understand who I am, that we're not these individual islands unto ourselves, right? That we are a collective and we function as a collective. And I think for me, you know, this may be one of the reasons that this period of sheltering at home is particularly challenging, right? Is that we're used to relating to one another in a certain way, and for the most part, those ways have not been deemed to be safe for our health right now. So we're trying to find new ways to connect in relationship with each other, because it's just that important to our understanding of who we are. We need each other, right, in that capacity. And so I'd like to ask another quick question for the chat. And that is, in thinking about our experiences with school, right, which are going to be varied, I want you to in the chat, just list out sort of your memories of your favorite experiences from school, the things you did. Like for me, I have such a strong memory of one of my favorite science fair projects. I got to do an exploration of math in the solar system and crunch all sorts of math formulas and stuff. And it's just something that has stayed with me. You know, so what about your experience in school, activities that you did, like, you know, your academic learning that was significant for you? Just, and chat, you know, you can type as many as you want into the chat. Hmm. Love of literature, contagious language. Does this mean no one else has anything
I'm coming.
Okay. um, and maybe we don't, you know, because actually, you know, I designed it to be a little bit of a trick question. Because what I want to ask now is
Not finished.
huh?
I'm not finished.
Are you writing an essay? What?
Yeah, just one more thing.
Okay.
Um,
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 okay, don't make me say pencils down. um,
okay.
yeah, so we may not have many of these moments. Oh, a model of an arm muscle in photography. Yeah, so
I
not a
never
lot.
forgot the balloon attached to the hinged.
Nice.
Uh,
Not a lot of memories streaming through, which is okay. But I want you to think now about um, your best friends in school. And you don't have to just, you know, maybe just first names, just chat the first names of your pals, and whatever age, and as many as you want. And we could just get a stream of good good friends that you made through your educational process.
use the spelling. Whatever. 2 L's, not one.
Yeah, so, and you can keep chatting to call them to mind if you want, because it's nice to think about that. But I think, you know, for me, it's interesting to note that, you know, I mean, how many people felt that was easier to do, to come up with the names than to come up with the activities, right? Because really it's the relationships that we remember. And the exciting thing about the moment we find ourselves in is that because of the internet, like, all of that information that we learned sort of growing up in school is available to us, right? It's like at our fingertips at any moment. So, I mean, kind of, you know, all that studying we did, all the all the worksheets we filled out. You know? Anyway,
Also, Lee, the extracurricular things and field trips, those stood out for me, you know.
Yes.
I
And
actually put one
why do
back.
those stand out? Why do those stand out?
I think because there was more room for social interaction, for one thing.
Yeah.
A lot of them more engaged in the community as well.
Mm-hmm.
What I find amazing is like when I go back on my memory, everything's from the summers. And then there's
Mm.
this just kind of dark blank during the school year. And then the summers would come out, like I remember every summer and everything I did, you know.
Wow.
Crazy.
Yeah, that's kind of telling.
It is. Yeah.
um, so, and I think for me, this importance of relationship. Is there someone who would want to read this quote for us?
I will.
Thank you.
The function of education is to teach one to think intensively and to think critically. But education which stops with efficiency may prove the greatest menace to society. The most dangerous criminal may be the man gifted with reason, but with no morals.
So, yeah, not a lot of elaboration needed on that.
No.
But it begs the question, how, so we've been sort of looking at this notion of, sort of what is education? And now we kind of going to look a little more specifically about the nature of this kind of education, taking a broader approach to education. And so, let's see. Sorry, my mouse keeps disappearing. Oops. So now that we find ourselves, right, at this new age, this conceptual age, the question is, what are the capabilities that we're talking about developing, right? That there's new capabilities that we need for this 21st century. People often think about 21st century thinkers, right? So what are, and we'll just sort of, we don't have to type them out, just sort of, you can unmute yourself and just sort of share what are, in just a general brainstorming, just some phrases or words that come to mind when you think about 21st century thinkers and the kinds of skills and qualities we need to have.
Holistic thinking, where things are interrelated.
Type or talk.
Mm-hmm.
Is this a discussion? We're talking now?
We're just going to kind of brainstorm what are some of these things, these 21st century, what is this new century calling us to equip ourselves with?
Collaboration is really important.
Yeah, collaboration, yeah.
People that know, sorry. Please go ahead.
Oh, no.
People that know how to think rather than what to think.
Yes, critical thinking skills. Well,
problem solving.
Yeah. Ability to adapt and innovate, create. Yeah. Well, this is the structure that Daniel Pink came up with. He's studied a lot about human motivation and how we think and the ways we engage. And I find it, and apologies for the grammar, the hanging letters, and it's not formatted very well, but I thought, I thought it was I stole it off the internet. I thought it was a nice way to to organize this. But these are the skills he has identified as sort of the essentials for the conceptual age. There's the the creativity, the symphony or harmony, the power of story, right? To be able to, instead of convince someone of a position like argument, the ability to persuade and and engender empathy, and then the role that play has in this, the joy and making things fun. We see this a lot of times manifested in, you know, these new tech companies that have, you know, game rooms in the in the foyer of the tech you know, like they've totally embraced the spirit of play in the workplace, and they do amazing things in the world, and everyone wants to work there, you know. um and and then finally, sorry,
Lee, whose thinking is this?
Daniel Pink. Oh, I should type that on there. um yeah. And just what I'm wondering, sort of what folks' reactions are to these skills. Like, are these any surprises here, or?
I guess what surprises me is that it all looks so appealing. And when I, you know, like the question itself causes me stress, and so I'm expecting something stressful.
Yeah, because it really, you know, what you were mentioning about, you know, the ability to adapt, it feels like, you know, the world is just changing at such a rapid pace, right? And things that were, you know, frontline innovative technologies just 10 years ago are now like obsolete. You know, I mean, I was listening to some music earlier and actually pulled out a cassette tape, and I thought, man, you know, what a throwback. It's just a cassette tape, you know, what the heck am I thinking? um,
Lee, when
but,
I see this chart, I see qualities of young people that have come recently into the workplace that they manifest this and are driving people my age, baby boomers, to quit their jobs. You know, they don't know what to do with them, but these are kind of like their way of thinking.
yes, we see a lot around the narrative of right, the strange attitudes of millennials, right? And I think a lot of it does have to do with this, you know, kind of new paradigm and new reality. Their approaches and what's important to them seems so off kilter. But at the same time, it's very rooted in a deep awareness of these new realities, right? It's sort of like, you know, they're coming in, you know, streaming music in their earbud. That actually happened to me yesterday. My daughter and I were working in the kitchen. I was like, oh, do you want me to put on some music, you know, so we can listen to it? She's like, I've got it. You know, I'm on my phone. I'm streaming music into my head as I'm like, you know, it's one of those kind of moments. um, but we also may have been thinking, and probably some of the kind of 21st century skills that more of us are familiar with look a little something like this, in a chart like this, where we think about, you know, there's particular literacies that we need to have, including the use of technology, right? Number 4, ICT is information and communications technology literacies. And then some of the things people mentioned before, critical thinking and creativity, the ability to collaborate, how we approach problems, and again, these character qualities that we have to draw upon for, you know, what someone mentioned, you know, the being able to adapt and innovate, right? It requires a deep well of sort of character. And what strikes me about this is we're talking about a lifelong learning process here as well. This isn't something that is just limited to, you know, your K-12 years anymore, or even, you know, higher ed, if you go on to any kind of higher education. But I also want to mention that I placed this little asterisk here because this, well, actually, sorry, before I get to the asterisk, one of the things that I wanted to call attention to is this idea of numeracy, right? And what often, just as an example of this sort of shift in how we think about these things, is, you know, we've always thought, you know, of math, and we approach math as like a separate subject, right? Math is just something you have to learn and you do in and of itself. And what we're seeing is this shift to understanding math as actual, like a language, right? Math is the language that the created world is written in, right? The universe is encoded mathematically. And math is the language we use to explore that universe through science, right? So, I think it's these kinds of shifts that help students, you know, it's really hard to just study. Well, I've found this, and I can say this because I love math and I'm a math nerd, and everywhere I go, I work to heal people's relationship with math, because, you know, when math is just this sort of thing that you have to study because you've told that you have to study it, and you don't understand how it relates to your life, and you hear all the time, when am I ever going to use this? Right? Why do I have to know algebra? What's the, you know, I don't want to do geometry, because we teach it as this thing, this isolated thing that most of us don't understand its relationship to our life. But when we see it as a language, the language that we use to make sense of the world around us, it becomes immensely important, right? And so we don't have to teach it as a separate subject. It gets infused in our exploration of lots of other things. And so these literacies, all of them are kind of like that. It's ways that we understand things, not necessarily as a we have to teach all these separate subjects, but it's like these are the things we're trying to strengthen so that you can engage with the world around you. And the fact is, the reason I have this little asterisk here is that there's so much more than even 6 of them, right? And so here we see a little example, and often you'll hear this referred to as multiple intelligences or multiple literacies. And that is that there's all sorts of ways that human beings are capable of engaging with the world, right? And making sense of it and drawing meaning out of it, which ultimately is one of the purposes of education. It's drawing meaning out of things, right? Why is it relevant to me? How can I use this? How can I use this, again, going back to that how can I use this to make myself better? How can I use this to make my world better? And so, yeah, we want to, and we can recognize then from this space that all of us are so very differently capacitated, right? The things that you're strong in, I'm not going to be strong in, and vice versa. And that this is the reason that relationship is so important, that when we want to address a problem or a challenge in our community or in our world, we have to come together as a team, right? Because we need your strengths and your strengths and your strengths, because all of us will bring something different, right, to apply. And that's how we'll actually be able to move. And think about, I mean, all the incredible advances we've made in many ways, right, in the world, but at the same time, so many of the problems that plague us, you know, hunger and poverty and, you know, this deeply ingrained, you know, racism and otherism and the religious intolerance and all these problems, they are still with us, even in, you know, and so in spite, it's like we're advancing, yet we're not making any progress. So because we haven't figured out how to actually come together, right, and address these, we operate, I think, too much from an individual point of view, right? And that's one of the challenges. Anyway, sorry, I'm trying to keep myself focused and on time and not distracted, but oh my gosh, you know, it just.
Can I just add that part of the reason I think we have a lot of problems is that we have the system that kind of rewards the wrong things. And so we have people that maybe don't have morals, having a lot of wealth and a lot of power, and that influences the society. If you have a lot of power, you have a lot of influence. And if you have a lot of money, unfortunately, you also have a lot of influence. And that reward system rewards the wrong, attributes, so to speak. And so people tend to always want to gravitate towards achieving those goals, and they end up being in positions that maybe they have even greater influence, greater negative influence in the society.
Yes. So a huge part of it is really having this moment to think about, what is it we in fact value? What is valuable about a human being? And how do we incentivize that? How do we bring that to the forefront? And again, not from a place of lecturing, but just from a place of like, this is the question I think that propelled me and excited me about this journey of homeschooling with my family, is that we got to keep that question central, right? And actually, we forgot a little exercise. We forgot the quiz, but this is a good time to do it. It's good time, isn't it? Because the quiz was really this idea of thinking about, what are those principles? So what is it that you personally find valuable? What are your goals? Like when you think about your children or your grandchildren or the children in your neighborhood or the children in your community, whoever it is that you're concerned about right now, what is it you want for them? And so I'm actually gonna pause here and give you a moment to write down a few things. What is it that our family values? And this you won't, this is for your personal use, not necessarily for sharing. So you can just be really honest and think deeply about. If you'd like to share, thank you, Quinta, for sharing. If anyone else wants to share in the chat, sort of their family. This really kind of is, this, and again, this isn't an easy, quick answer to come up with, right? This is a good question to really sit with and think deeply and maybe even engage in a family dialogue, with everybody. What is that we value? Why do we value what we value? Because this kind of deals with the, the what of education, but we're going to move a little bit into the how, right? And the how is really going to be driven by what it is you're trying to achieve, right? So what you value and these principles are going to drive how you get there. And this may be a little too complex. I think I got a little carried away trying to put too much onto one slide, so I apologize for that. But I wanted to, I guess, but by show of hands, how many people are familiar or remember the scientific method from school? Yeah. So the scientific method is something, it's sort of a process, and, it's a way to engage, that we learned, to engage with questions and the world. And I think perhaps we can use that idea of that kind of framework to kind of make some sense of like this wide open space, right? This blank page kind of that's before us, to make a little sense of it. And that is there's a process going back to, kind of the paradigm shift we talked about, in really learning that education is not, it's not something, I'm going to look for, it's not something someone bestows on you, right? Like they don't just fill your pail with education. It really is the process of your search, you being on fire to know things and to make sense of the world around you. And so we can draw on the idea of something like the scientific method when we think about that it's less about what you know and what you learn. It's more about the process you use to get there. And that's the thing that we want to really strengthen, right, in each student. And for me, this little graphic here kind of captures that. There's this, I don't know if you can see the mouse. Does my mouse show up when I move it? Okay.
Yeah.
So there's this sort of breadth of knowledge, right? And I think, and for the most part, at least my experience in the elementary schools, we went to public school in the elementary schools, that we tend to do a good job exploring this, right, in our educational process, being exposed to lots of new things and ideas and concepts and people and places. But what we can get stronger in, I think, is that every once in a while, this idea that a child is going to land on something that has deep significance for them, that they're going to want to take deeper. And that this is where we build true understanding, is this sort of interaction. And I represented it here as this spiral, because I feel like as you begin to dive deeply into something and learn more, it actually expands your awareness and your consciousness of other things as well. So they're not quite linear in this, right? It's not just these two intersecting lines. It really is more of this sort of swirling process, right? And the more you know, the more you realize, the less you know, kind of, I'm messing that quote up. But it's like this process of expanding our awareness as well as deepening our understanding by engaging, by taking this idea or this experience or this person, right, and deepening that relationship or that understanding through the various ways that we act, right? And again, this is a key part of how we learn, is we have to practice it, right? We have to put it into practice in the world, right? And when we look at young children, this is what they naturally do, right? When you talked about the summers, Helen, when you're on your own, the playground over summer, you can't help but do this. The kids they naturally do this because human beings, like, we want to understand, we want to make meaning out of things. You can't keep a kid from doing that. You can make it a little boring. You can kind of dull it out of them, but you can't make them not want to know. And eventually we embody this. This can also be, this process is very similar to any kind of apprenticeship, right? This notion that a sustained effort over time in learning a specific thing, it actually unlocks your understanding of other things. This is why quite often the people that we turn to, maybe the people you thought of as your, inspiration, are people that have reached a level of wisdom and understanding over the course of many years of doing this kind of process, of engaging deeply and distilling their knowledge in a way that they're able to share it with others. And so over here in the white letters, I kind of described, to me, it's sort of like an expanded notion of this scientific method. It's like we engage in this spirit of service, driven by some question or some deep problem that we personally have, or our family's having, or our neighborhood has, or the world has. It's almost always question driven, just like the scientific method, right? And the spirit of being of service, of solving a meaningful question. And it involves us in engaging in hard work, right? To make this happen, to understand our reality, to consult with others, to get a greater sense, to come up with a specific action we can take, especially around solving problems, and then to pause afterward to reflect on, how did that go? What could have gone better? Were we asking the right question? Maybe, maybe the outcome we had wasn't what we expected because the question we asked wasn't really the essential question. This kind of reflection process, and then just doing it over and over again, and again, gradually expanding our understanding and awareness. I want to pause here before I move on, just to see if there's any question, because I feel like I tried to pack a lot into this slide, and I I hope it's not, it makes sense to me, but that's because I have it in my head. But are there any questions or thoughts about this? Yeah, Stephanie.
Yes, I'm over in the white block. The bottom says, "Till embody the principles habitually." Implication. Somehow I'm not seeing where that fits in, or even what that means. Maybe.
Yeah. So for me, there's and I'm going to use the example of the arts just because I think it's really profound. There's this a documentary I watched about a potter. It was a very particular type of Japanese pottery that he did. And it took him 10 years as an apprentice to even begin to start making pottery, right? Before that, he was having to do all sorts of other things. And he said, that apprenticeship process is really about understanding the tools that you have to work with and the materials that you have to work with. So you're getting to know the clay and the nature of the clay, and you're getting to know the nature of your hands as a tool, or these other, shaping tools and things, and how they work and the effect they have. And it's kind of this, dance that you do, this interaction. And it takes a while to master, to get a sense of sort of mastery of both those, the tools and the material. But once you do, then you enter what he describes as this phase of true artistry, where you're no longer having to think of the materials and the tools. Stuff is able to just flow through you, right? You're creating because your use of the tools and your knowledge of the material have become so habitual, right? So ingrained that you're not even having to think about what you're making anymore. It can just flow out of you. And to me, that's this, you understand the implications of what you can see things, you can basically channel into the world stuff that you didn't even understand. You might not even understand where it comes from, right? that it's like a level of engagement. And so it's beyond, you know, when we understand our actions, and we can apply this behavior here and there, or this learning here and there. But for me, it's understanding the implications these principles have in other scenarios that you may not have even imagined yet, if that makes sense.
Kind of. I'm getting there.
And you know, it's a creative process. It really is. I mean, many artists speak of this notion of really this experience of channeling something, that this didn't come from me. You know, if you're a musician, whatever it is, it comes through you and expresses itself as music. Or if you're a dancer, you know, you've honed your body, you know, with the craft of dancing, it flows through you and expresses itself in dance, right? So it's going to express itself in a variety of ways, depending upon how we've honed our own instrument. And so that's why I think the arts is a powerful example of this kind of wisdom.
I think what's still a question mark for me is where the word implication comes in.
Implication might be the wrong word to use. To me, it makes sense, but I think it speaks to the sort of being able to infer something, to sort of transcend a current reality, right? To bring into being something that didn't seem possible before. It has implications for what can be. And maybe, like I said, implication may be the wrong word to use here. So
Well,
I can go back and tinker with that. But
I really appreciate your model. I love the model. I mean, you're really ambitious in trying to do this. So going back to the idea of the tools on one side and the knowledge on one side, that there's kind of a leap in being able to put those two together to create something new. This has to do with creativity, doesn't it? I mean,
yes,
it can. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. But I think anything we do in the world, you know, is an expression of our creativity, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
and that it's the ultimate thing that distinguishes human beings from the rest of creation. Like, you know, I don't know, we not only create, but we're conscious of our process of creation, right? we're aware of what we're doing, and aware of our limitations. I don't know, that's a whole nother talk. But yeah, I don't want to, I'd love to, if there are more folks who want to reflect on this, and perhaps I've tried to put too much into a presentation of it, but I'm welcome to discuss this a little more in depth at some point as well. But I want to get to sort of the heart of why you're here, which apologies that we're just now hitting the sort of first slide of really, you know, kind of what brought you here. And that is this overwhelming sea of opportunities and possibilities and new experiences that can seem so like, oh my gosh, what in the, you know, there's just too much. I don't even know what to ask. There's so much, right? And I put these two on here almost to make it deliberately busy, right? Because there is just so much. But one of the main things to think about is and I don't want to spend too much time going into the details of this, but I'm, like I said, you know, I can send this to you so you can explore it at length. And there's a link to a website down here, this Pam Barnhill, her guide to homeschool methods. She goes through a lot of this stuff here on the right side and just kind of defines it. Hey, here's what project-based learning is, and here's what unschooling is, and here, you know, but the whole idea is like there's this huge spectrum of possibility, and there's not any one way to do it, which can seem terribly frightening and overwhelming, but at the same time, you know, exciting and challenging and empowering. And And so I want to, I think I'm going to have to pause the presentation here to share a bit. Well, no, maybe I can do it. Let me see. I'm going to have to move something. I just wanted to share a little musical piece that I thought might, oh yeah, I think I can. Okay. Is that coming through? And do you still see all the possibilities, the busy screen of, okay.
Folks have been on this planet for generations in every land and every nation, giving their best from dawn to dusk, leaving all they learned to us. Add it together, what do you got? 1, 2, 3, we got a whole lot. We're rich. Well, these citizens have come and gone. The gifts they've left live on and on. From Asia Minor to Mexico, Papua New Guinea to Ohio. Add it together, what do you got? 1, 2, 3, we got a whole lot. We're rich. Think about games. We got hopscotch. We got chess and pachisi. We got double dutch jump rope. Now that doesn't look easy. We got baseballs, bocce balls, rugby, lacrosse, and in the game of polo, there's a bull and a horse. We're rich. Think about dance. We got hip hop. We got the Highland fling. We got hula and calypso. We got the western swing. We got line dance, hoop dance, fancy dance, jig. They tell me in Madrid the flamenco is big. We're rich. We're rich. Oh yeah. We got songs that move us, machines that think, drums that talk, and lights that blink. We got cosmonauts out, bigger canoes, Arabic numerals and southern blues. Add it together, what do you got? 1, 2, 3, we got a whole lot. We're rich. We're rich. Sing it.
Feel free to dance.
It's been done before, we'll do it again. That's where we come in, my friend. It's in our hearts and in our minds. Add a gift to what we find. Take it all together, what do you got? 1, 2, 3, we got a whole lot. We're rich. We're rich. We're rich. We're rich.
Okay. I'm glad that worked out. So let's see. How do we get back to? There we go. So yeah, it is a lot and it's daunting, but I think also very exciting. One thing that I wanted to share is, again, going back to your own statement of what's valuable, right, to you and your family, is that then really each family is going to have to come up with, what makes sense for them. But at the same time, you're not, you're not completely alone. And hopefully, that's why you're here. We can draw on the experiences of folks who have come before. But that's also what makes it so challenging, right? Is that there isn't a way to just say, hey, here's what you should do, here's here's your solution, because every family is so different, and our our values are different, even though they may be, you know, fairly universal, some values. So our approaches, and our children are inherently different. One thing that I think is helpful to keep in mind is this expression, you know, the need for this complexity is because I need to remember who said this. It was so profound to me. No two children are born into the same family, right? So even when we think of our family as like this basic building block, right, of civilization, right, that we're all part of a family in some way, everyone experiences that family different. So even within a family, everyone is highly differentiated, right? So the first child born into that family comes in as the only child, right? But the second child comes in as, you know, not as the only child. It's a very different family for them than it was for that first child, you know, and so we're all, it's part of the challenge that we're all so different, but we're trying to do something together. And so that's where the creativity comes in, is how do we honor our differences at the same time and support and encourage each other, you know, as a community, as a family. So I wanted to just share, and I wasn't going to go into the whole variety of, you know, I started out, you know, I've tried a little bit of everything. I've bought curriculum, I've created curriculum, I've started out very regimented, and, you know, and this schedule, you know, it's like, you're going to get up at 8:30 and you're going to say your prayers, and then you're going to do a half hour of vocabulary, then you're going to do, you know, like, and I've gone to the other extreme of just, you know, unschooling, sort of, you know, whatever. I'm not battling today. I'm not battling this month. That turned into half a year, you know, just like, we're just going to live life. We're going to learn what we learn by living. And there's a whole spectrum of stuff in between there, right? And I've tried a little bit of everything, and so I'm happy. But what I've come to understand is this: when it comes to the ways of homeschooling, and recognizing too that what we're doing now, and my friend Daria, you know, pointed this out, that what we're doing now with the COVID-19 is very different. We're not really talking about true homeschooling, because even homeschoolers are freaking out right now and not able to do what they typically do, right? Because it is very social and engaged, and field trips and in the community, right? And a lot of that is gone. So everyone is trying to figure out a new way forward, which can be challenging, but also it puts us all, you know, we're all in the same place. And so we can be immensely, anyway. So while there's no one way, we're all trying to figure this out. The main thing is to stay true to your purpose, right? And that vision, what's valuable to you as a family, because when things go wrong, and they're going to go wrong, right? And you're going to doubt yourself, and you're going to be like, oh my gosh, I made the wrong decision, and this isn't working, and I've ruined my kid's life. Or if you don't think it, someone else is going to think it, and they're going to call you and be like, you know what you just did? You just ruined your kid's life. You know, what were you thinking? You're going to get all that. I mean, maybe not now, because everyone's in the same place. Maybe that's one of the benefits of now. It's like we're going to be a lot less judgmental of each other, because we're all in the same place. But just you can call to mind that purpose and really stay true to that. As long as we're doing that, as long as what we did today serves that, then what we did today was good, right? And if it didn't serve that, then at least we learned that, you know, that's not serving us. And just remembering that there's no right or wrong way, right, to do it. It's really about what's best for your family. And especially now in this moment of sort of, you know, crisis and upheaval, is, you know, that's what's most important, is that family is this loving comforting place. It won't always be harmonious. I was talking to someone earlier, actually I was talking with Alexa, Stephanie, earlier, and I used the word harmonious, and I immediately corrected myself. I was like, it's not going to always be harmonious, but it can always be loving, right? And so we just need to have patience with ourselves and with our kids, and remember that we're not alone, right? That we have people that we can call on, ancestors that have passed, mentors that have inspired us, community that we can lean on, and that hopefully, will, some beautiful things will be channeled out of us through this process. That being said, here are the very quick nuts and bolts of law, legally, what North Carolina requires. If you are choosing not to register with the public school for this coming year, even though registering with a public school is going to be online for the beginning at least, there are there's attendance. I mean, they have a set of work that the expectations that they have for children that you will have to move through. So it may not look a whole lot different, but what's different about homeschooling is that you get to decide what is it, right? And you may notice that there's very few requirements. A lot of people that I talk to about this, sometimes it troubles people that there are so few requirements. And actually there is someone making an effort to require more of homeschooling in North Carolina. They think it's a little too open. But basically all that's required by North Carolina law to register as a family to homeschool is that one parent must have at least a high school diploma or its equivalent. And you have to prove that. No more than 2 families can homeschool together, which only means, you can get together and do whatever you want, but, if you have 3 families, 2 of those families have to be registered as a homeschool, right? This experience, throughout my homeschooling experience, I actually homeschooled other people's children for them. Friends of mine whose children were having a hard time in the public schools, who needed an alternative, but were single mothers and they couldn't homeschool for themselves. So I just added their kid to my homeschool. That's what that means by no more than 2 families can school together. You have to file an official notice of your intent to operate as a homeschool, which is a simple 4-question form that basically just says, hi, my name is so-and-so. I plan to homeschool. Here's what I'm going to call my homeschool. Here's proof that I graduated high school. And here's my address. And that's it. You do have to maintain immunization and attendance records by state law, which again, for a lot of homeschoolers, attendance record is just, here's the calendar. I checked off every day because every day we were learning, right? And you have to administer a nationally standardized test to each student each year. They don't have to pass that test. You don't have to submit the results of that test. You just have to administer it. And this is the website here that shows much more detail about the homeschooling requirements, but really this is it. Other than that, it's wide open, which again, like I said, terrifies some people, excites others. Any questions about the law or the actual sort of specific requirements around homeschooling? Yeah.
In the case of a grandparent or yourself homeschooling someone else's children, I'm just curious, does the parents still have to show a diploma? Or the person who's actually responsible for the homeschooling?
I don't know. When it comes to family like that, extended family, I'm not sure, because the parent, it used to be, so they changed the law. It used to be by law, a homeschool was someplace where the parent provided the 4 main studies. Your English, math, science, and history had to be provided by the parents. You could outsource any of the rest of it, right? But then they changed the law And they said that basically a homeschool is just one in which the parents have decided to bring their children home and they're going to decide how that kid gets educated. So the parent doesn't even have to be the one giving the education anymore. You can choose, you can outsource all of the education that you want. So I'm not sure the particulars of that. If maybe the parent, the direct parent of the child would have to register to the homeschool, but they don't have to be the one doing anything at all. They could turn that over, to a grandparent or anyone else in the community,
Okay.
and be within their rights. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So just a few more, I want to be able to open up to questions, a few more just sort of things to keep in mind that I've found helpful. This is something I learned as a Girl Scout leader and that has just stuck with me, has been so profound. And that is, again, this knowing that, the other thing that there's not, it's not such a thing as like setting something in stone and then you have to like follow that and it remains the same and sort of fixed. You have the freedom to be all over the place, right? And to really go with the ebb and flow. And so there's a natural ebb and flow with the seasons, right, that you can take advantage of. And I've typically found that, like, in the winter time, it's just really hard. Like, I don't know, just something about the winter, it just kind of makes us shut down a little bit, right? And our energy in the winter is different. And our desire to engage in certain ways is different. And so in my homeschooling experience, I've started to go ahead and plan for that and just be like, we're not going to cruise along at the same pace and stuff, over winter, because it makes us all nuts. We're going to go ahead and slow down and, maybe even do something very drastically different over winter and just focus on, learning to knit if that's what we want to do, right? And cook food for each other, so you can have it all over the place seasonally and ebb and flow, and each week could look different, each day could look different, all of that is available to you. But this thing from the Girl Scouts, and I apologize that in blowing it up, it made it kind of harder to read. But I find it very profound. And that is something that Girl Scouts tell their leaders. The essence of their training is recognizing that your role in that child's life should evolve over time, right? And so what we have here, and you may not recognize this, down here it says Daisy, Brownie, Junior. Basically, this is the girls as they get older, right? And this is the role of the adults. Now down here, when they're cute little daisies and they're in kindergarten, you can see the adults have the bulk of the responsibility. They do everything. And the cute little daisies just show up and they have a great time in their Girl Scout troop and they do lots of fun things and crafts and they enjoy it. And and they just show up and have fun. The adult really does all the work. But Girl Scouts tells you that by the time that girl hits high school, your role as a troop leader should be less and less and less. And ultimately, with high school girls, you should almost be invisible. You have to be there for legal reasons, right? You need to have an adult in the room. But other than that, the girls do everything. And these Girl Scout troops, they take international trips and do incredible service projects. I don't know how many Girl Scouts we have in the room or Boy Scouts, and they do all of it. And so keeping that in mind, when you understand that you're trying to work yourself out of a job, right? That's the point of educating, is to get your child to a point where they are independent and engaged and empowered and in control of their own learning. And they're coming to you less and less for support and guidance and instruction. And this is why, for me, I love middle schoolers, because they're right here. And it's this wonderful dance you get to do with, kind of the push and pull of, there's things I want to introduce you to. And at the same time, there's things I have to learn from you. And middle schoolers are this great combination of aware enough that they're asking great questions and they have really deep things on their hearts and minds, but they're still willing to be a little goofy and malleable and kind of, try things out. I find myself, I'm not cool enough for the high schoolers. I'm a little dorky for the high schoolers. They kind of have a clearer sense of who they are and what they want to be, and I don't often fit into that. But anyway, I've always found this chart extremely helpful in understanding my role, right, in relationship to the children or youth that I have in front of me. And the other thing I want to speak to, because I know it's always quote, pun intended, the elephant in the room, which is this idea of testing and assessment. And that's the question you always get is, how do you know? How do you know that what you're doing is working? How do you know that they, learned something, or that they're more capacitated? And so I want to ask, oh shoot, I meant to ask this question before I switch the slide, but the question I have is, I like to ask parents what test it is that you administered to your own children, that to find out whether or not they were potty trained, right? And so the thing is, we don't test for that. The evidence of that is the act itself. And when you're in this, I find this is one of the benefits of not necessarily homeschooling exclusively, but small, close, relationship-based learning, is that when you're in a relationship with someone that you care about, and your orientation is to empower them to be their best selves, you look for things and you get all sorts of signs of how they're doing. And I'm sure you experience this with your own kids. You know when they're engaged, and you know when they're learning and when they're not. And you almost don't, I mean, in the face of that, I mean, do you actually need a test to tell you, who your kid is and what they're up to and what they're excelling at and where they're struggling? We know these things.
I always felt like it was a complete time waster.
Yes. And so I love this.
I ever taught.
Yeah. So not only is, this cartoon is this example of, we have one standard that we hold all kids to, and most kids walk away feeling like they're horrible failures because they can't, meet that one standard. They can't climb the tree. But then I also like this quote from India. It says, in India, when we want the elephant to grow, we feed the elephant. We don't weigh the elephant. Right. And so I think a lot of what we see, and this is, I don't want to get on my soapbox about the testing industry, but really I feel like between the testing industry and the textbook industry, those are the folks that run our school system, right? And it's big money. It's big money. And that's all I'm going to say about that. That's a whole nother exploration. But all this to say, again, when you look at your own relationship with your child, when they were learning to walk, when they're learning to talk, all these things, you very rarely probably resorted to formal testing measures, right? You just, your kid. And each kid is different. And what works with one kid to encourage one kid is going to totally discourage another kid, right? So we have to, know our kids and have that flexibility and approach. And then just really listen for what they're telling us, because they'll tell us what they're struggling with. They'll tell us what they're loving, right?
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
So I love that, and that's really wonderful. I guess in my mind, I have a question of how do I know what's best. I know testing, they don't need it. Maybe I know what they know. I know what they don't know. However, they live in this world where soon there will be some test expectations. So how do I navigate that? Because it's a reality that we have here, and yet we all know that tests don't usually really show, we all know those things, but yet it's there before you get to any, they want your SAT,
Yes.
ST, they want your MCAT if you're going to professional school, they want your LSAT if you're going to law school, they want to see it.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a way to, I don't know,
Yeah. So
to shed some light?
yes, this is the ultimate question. This is the big one. And I'm going to go ahead. Yeah, my kids are on the other side of this. So I'm going to go ahead and share very honestly my experience with this. Now, there's two things that are important to remember. One is that for the most part, well, a lot depends on what your goal is in life, right? Not every kid's goal is to do something that requires a higher education or university learning, right? And when we think about economy and we think about, you know, what we want for our kids, we want, quite often what I hear parents saying is, I want my kid to be able to move out of the house. I want them to be able to take care of themselves, right? And have a good job so they can actually eat and pay the rent. And I think we can easily recognize that in many ways, kids that have actual trade skills and service related jobs, like you know, our carpenters, our construction workers, our plumbers, our electricians, our solar technology, you know, engineer, you know, all of these kinds of things are in much greater demand and much less likely to have their job outsourced overseas. And so I think there's lots of ways to get financial and economic stability that don't involve university level courses. The second part of that is that universities themselves are more and more moving away from these exams. And I need to find the article. I don't know, maybe you know, Helen. I don't think it was Harvard. It may have been Yale. One of these schools has just announced they will no longer be requiring SAT scores.
I saw that too.
Yeah.
I think it was Harvard, but
yeah. Well, so what folks are realizing is that those tests, they don't really tell you a whole lot about the student or the child, you know, and what they're going to bring, or even their ability to be successful in a higher education environment. It hasn't correlated to being anything predictive about capacity.
Can I say something about timed tests that I had personal experience with a child of mine
Mm-hmm.
who never didn't do as well on tests as I knew she was able, her capacities were. And in Brazil, tests were used a lot on children. And then we came to the United States. She was in high school in Massachusetts, and they had quite a heavy testing process in their junior year called the MCAS. But the MCAS was not a timed test. And she told me that she was the second to last person to finish the MCAS. And I thought, oh my God, here we go, you know. The results came in the mail and she was very high in everything, which only told me that she needed more time. That was all she needed. Yeah. So being a person who did her thinking process was slower. Yeah. I remember myself in all these SATs and everything that I was always frustrated by not mm-hmm. finishing in time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's lots that's, you know, again, a whole nother discussion on the testing industry and its impact on education. But more and more schools are moving away from it, recognizing, and more universities are actually actively recruiting homeschool kids and making special allowances for the fact that they don't have the same, transcript as public school or private school kids, because they recognize that these kids typically are independent, strong thinkers, very creative, and do very well in problem solving and bring a lot to, you know, the educational process. So they're actually starting to actively recruit homeschoolers more and more. So that's the sort of education side. Now on the other side of it is my own experience with testing and grades, even grades. You know, I don't do textbooks or grades or any of that kind of stuff. But all three of my girls have gone on to higher education. And quite honestly, although I probably shouldn't say this publicly, I will tell you because I want to make this point so clearly. It's like when it came time to make their transcript. I mean, I did have one of my daughters who took the SAT just because she wanted to. I mean, actually, and when they hit about middle school, I started using that as the standardized test that they took every year, because why not? Even, you know, they had to take something and then they just got used to it, and then it wasn't a scary thing. But by and large, when it came time to making that transcript for those kids to go to college, I made it up. I'm going to tell you honestly and point blank, I made it up. It's a numbers game, and I made up their transcript. And legally, as a homeschool parent, I had the authority to do so.
I'm going to report you to the board.
Go ahead. They're all in college now. They're on. They can't, no takebacks, right? But you know, so if the kid, again, and these tests and these measures are just a way, and I'm going to move on to the next slide because it actually talks about the difference between testing and assessment. You know, that even this idea of these tests, we have to recognize that even in school, they're not very useful. And I think most teachers and educators will tell you that this is the bane of their existence, these tests. They don't help them teach the students. They're not an assessment of where the kid is at. A test isn't, right? And so part of it is just this game that we end up having to play. And it's a numbers game. And the same with, you can see it very clearly for me in like something like a grade point average, right? Which becomes very important in high school, your grade point average, which to me always seems so ridiculous. This idea that you can distill a human being down into a single number that means anything at all about who they are and what they bring to the table, even as someone who loves math, that's ridiculous to me. It's just not, it means nothing. It means nothing. And I think we're starting to see more sort of awakening to that realization that we've been measuring the wrong things, right? And what you measure is what you get. So when we continue to measure these things, we continue to get these kinds of outcomes, and we get kids who aren't creative, independent thinkers, and we all suffer because of it. So I don't want to, yes.
I'm thinking we might not have to worry too much about tests. From what I'm hearing, seriously, from what I'm kind of along with what you're saying, but just to add some more fuel to the fire here, I'm hearing that there's so much difference in what kids are doing in their homeschooling experience with their families at home, that the educators are starting to realize it's not fair to test them, because some are able to keep up under their home conditions and others aren't. So as a person who is a change agent, find a lot in the world to be changed, and hoping that things are going to end up being really, really different. I think this is one of those things that's going to fall by the wayside, because how can they ever get, I hate to be so negative, if we get back to school as it was, how are we going to be able to, at that point, test the children?
Yeah.
It just doesn't make sense anymore.
Yeah. And I think, even if we do go back to it, really, everyone's getting a bye year this year, right? I think we can acknowledge that, this year, or at least this next semester, right? At least this next semester of school, everyone's getting a pass.
Which it amounts to a year, because they already had a semester like that.
Yeah. So yeah. I share this again, not to get into too big a debate around testing and assessment, just to know that, you know, we don't need to stress ourselves out about these things. These are in somewhat arbitrary measures, and we do stress about them, but they don't need to be a source of stress, right? You can take that same energy and give it to your kid, right? And decide, you know, how are they doing? And this is the kind of thing where I think, like, I'd like to see us moving more toward this understanding of assessment. So when you put the kid, and sorry, I don't know why there's a cell phone in the middle there. I grabbed this from the wrong thing, but pretend there's not a cell phone there, or a tablet, whatever that is. But when you put the kid in the center and you really think through that there's so many ways to get a sense of how they're doing and encourage them in ways they're doing, and setting their own goals in deciding what to struggle through, right? Sometimes it's good to struggle through something. Sometimes it's okay to recognize, you know, the value I thought this had doesn't have value, and I need to struggle in something else. You know, to constantly being able to do that self-assessment and critique of your own process and revise your approach, right? And be immensely flexible. And the opportunity then to collaborate with others and develop more authentic relationships with all sorts of people, not just your classmates, not just your peer group, not just your family, but really seeing yourself as part of a global, you know, family of humans striving to each bring something creatively into the world to impact their world, right? And again, we talked about this, all of the world's knowledge being at your fingertips right now. I mean, you don't have to memorize anything anymore. If it's helpful to you, like if it's an area that you want to do that deep dive and become an expert in, you know, yes, then you need to know this stuff, right? So it can become habitual. There's a committing of memory, certain things. But the rest of it, it's helpful. It's fine to just know about it and know where to find it, and know what to do with it when you do find it. You know, these kinds of having that sense of agency. And then also just having this continued kind of personal connection to what you're learning. One thing I can share, you know, there's a whole bunch of different models, and learning how to try different ways. Like, you know, maybe you're trying to learn one thing, and instead of, you know, when you encounter some challenge with it, maybe try 4 different ways to learn that same one thing, right? I think math is another good example of this. You know, we teach math in one way here, but the rest of the world does math very differently, right? Approaches to math vary by country, you know? So when you're trying to solve a certain kind of math problem, you know, ask yourself, you know, how do they do this over in China? How do they do this in Syria? How do they work this problem out in Nigeria? You know, because there's all sorts of ways to tackle the same problem and issue, you know, to have these models, a variety of models to draw on. Oh shoot, I was going to share an example, but now I've forgotten. Anyway, I've forgotten the specific example I was going to share. But again, you can get the sense that, you know, there's a rich possibility in, sorry, I'm being very aware of time here, so I'm going to try and move really quickly these last 2 slides. One thing, when you're parents who work from home, or if you have to go to work, this coming year has a lot of implications for work considerations, right? Now, this is a chart someone has come up with. Again, I'm not sharing it from a place of you have to follow this, but this is just one example of thinking through what's necessary for a child instruction wise, right? And that even for the high schoolers, shoot, I should have done the math ahead of time. What is that? 270. So that's a little less than 5 hours for a high school student in a day, right? And that's for high school. And clearly you see, 3 hours for a middle schooler and very little for elementary school. And so when we think about this, I mean, quite often what you'll hear teachers saying is that a big part of the school day is spent around issues of discipline and class management, right? Getting the class from this place to that place, getting the class settled in, So when you're at home, all of that time gets distilled down into a very short period. So you don't want to overwhelm a kid, with a 9 to 4 experience of schooling at home, because that is just, it exposes them to more mental content and skill building than they would be at school, right? There's a lot of downtime at school. And so the question, and I don't have an answer to this, but it's something as a family you need to think through. So the question for working families is, if my kindergartner really should only be engaged, actively in instructional or educational activities for an hour and a half, what do I do the rest of the time? And again, that's not something I can answer for you, but it's something that I acknowledge that folks will have to think about. But I would like to say that when we take this approach of really thinking about students in this new paradigm of education, what some folks refer to as education 3.0, where we see students as, learners that are connecting, they're actually creating content, they're constructing their learning and their reality. With a little bit of guidance and encouragement, maybe just spending a half hour exploring a certain concept or task, then they can be free to explore it the whole day in a variety of ways. Maybe they want to come up, maybe they want to make a song about it. Maybe they want to make, they're really into this, this little biology video y'all just watched about, cell transfer of, information, and they want to make a TikTok video about it. They could spend the whole day doing that, right? After a little half-hour interaction with you around a certain subject. That's just one sort of example. But to really, I know this question of time, how, again, it goes back to your purpose as a family and what's valuable to you. And that will direct, how you want them to quote unquote, fill their time in a day, and how you're using your time with them and spending, your time together, and them spending their time, independently. And someone had just shared, and I thought it was really, really cool, although again, scary. And it makes me cry because I'm on the other side of it with, my youngest about to leave, for her college journey soon. And that is that you get 18 beautiful summers with these kids, right? And this is one of them, one of 18. So even if you think in the homeschool context, you get 18 years. This is one of 18. It's not a lot. And so it's an opportunity for us to think about, very consciously, given all the possibilities, how we want to spend that year. And then I just want to close with this final sort of thought that, although it's challenging and there's so much that can be daunting about this, to really spend what little energy you have leaning into the good parts, right? Knowing that there's going to be frustrating parts as well. And these were kind of my, really, I could have showed you the Monopoly game slide and this slide, and that'd have been it. That would have been, so the the big takeaways from what I have to share. And this is, no matter what you want to do or have, you can't teach your kid anything they don't want to learn. You can beat them over the head for it. You can't make a kid want to learn something they don't want to learn. And that's a power game we all end up playing, and usually not playing very well. So I learned through a lot of trial and error to let go of that, right? And to focus instead of really staying connected to that sense of purpose, right? And when they understand who they are and what's possible for them in the world, then you can't stop them from learning, right? There's nothing you can do to keep them. And again, they'll do it in their way. It won't look like the way you want them to, you know. I've learned that through my own kids as well. And then going back to our own experiences with education, that really what it is we remember the most are those relationships we build. The relationship we have with our family, which is primary, right? And the relationships we have with our friends and our communities, and the relationship we have with reality, and just understanding how, you know, how our lives impact the world around us and vice versa, how the world impacts us. And I just share, I love this photo because these young women had the bounty of homeschooling together for about 4 years. And again, and I feel like I did lots of really cool stuff and hands-on, out of the box, arts-based, you know, all of this. And I would venture to say, and I'm actually, we're planning to do a little sort of meeting where we invite some of these students to come back and share their experiences with homeschooling so you can hear from them directly. But I would venture to say 3 of them have gone on, have transitioned into their college experience. And the youngest there is still in middle school. But I would venture to say that they probably don't remember a whole heck of a lot of anything we did, as amazing as it was. And I'm not biased because I created it. But what they have in each other will never leave them. And they really are just empowered, engaged, beautiful human beings who care about the people around them and don't quite know what it's going to look like yet, but do want to do something to make the world better, to impact it positively. And they're still on their journey to figure out what that is. And so I leave that as sort of a wish, you know, for you and your family, that you're able to find a place. And I just, their smiles to me just say it all. They're just so radiantly in love with each other and in love with life and just happy. Yeah, it's a beautiful process. And so we come back to the blank slate we started with, and I hate to leave you with a blank slate, but in many ways, you know, that is what you have before you. And again, it's not, you're not alone. And I'm hoping if you're interested, I'll send some information. I'm preparing another presentation to look about sort of some plans I'm coming up with for this coming year, a framework that might help support families and so that families don't have to kind of create this all for themselves. It would be a very loose framework of, you know, just some space for kids to gather together, both online and actually in person in my driveway. I think I'm planning to set up, I have some donated tables and things to set up the driveway as an outdoor COVID safe classroom for doing some fun math games and science experiments and art projects and stuff. So if you're interested in that, I'll be sure to invite you to that presentation, which goes into some more specifics about the approach I've chosen, right, for the kids that I educate. It may or may not be a right fit for you, but it's available. But so I just want to leave with this this notion that yes, you have this blank slate in front of you to decide how you're going to move forward. But I think this quote, again, this quote for me could be is the essence of the whole presentation anyway. Is there someone who would be willing to read it out loud for us?
Sure. Homeschooling is about the environment you create for your children. It's about delight in learning. about love and support and a nurturing family atmosphere. In the end, it's about the people they and you become.
So thank you all for being here and helping me, sort of distill my own thinking, and in a way that I hope is useful for other people. I'll probably, I've learned a lot in this process. I'm going to change some wording and change some some things around, and try again with another set of families. But I really appreciate your gift of your time and your insights and your thoughts and your questions, which I think are the most valuable things we contribute to each other, is the questions that we have, right? So yeah, if anybody has any last other sort of burning thoughts or things they'd like to see me address that I didn't address, that maybe we can, talk one-on-one later, or I can do a whole nother presentation, or I don't know. I'm open.
I've always had this question as an educator. Is it the society that dictates our education system, or is it the education system that forms the society? And I don't mean to talk about it now, but it's a big question. But someday with some group, it would be an interesting, and maybe it has applied up till now. And from this point on, maybe, I don't know. It's just something I'd like to explore someday with somebody.
Mm-hmm.
I hope we have continued spaces like this,
Mm-hmm.
because for me, it's just been a delightful space to come to hear you share about your experience. And I really appreciate that you've been inviting me to these spaces.
Yeah. Well, I have a commitment. I've told someone I every Monday night, it'll be this same link, using this same link, probably from like 8 to 9. So it's a little past dinner and maybe bedtime if folks have younger kids. And, just at least throughout, at least until December, just open that space up on Mondays just for general question and answer. Again, just because we don't even know, right, what's we have no idea what's coming or what it's going to be like. So how can we possibly formulate the questions, that we're going to
trying to figure out how to get these young kids
in even August
outside and doing what normal young kids do.
Right. So I do have a commitment to opening that space, every Monday night, so we can bring those questions, just like the questions of the week, right? Because you could almost even open a nightly space and still not exhaust but anyway, so yeah, so there's that.
Thank you.
And I'll send a notice about that as well. And then again, hopefully, if we're, interested, and, maybe something will evolve, out of these conversations, that more specific ways to collaborate and help each other and support each other. That, again, like I said, that we not even aware might be a possibility yet. So.
Lee, you will be sharing this right away on YouTube. What should we look for? Just
I probably should, although, again, my own self-critical is like, I want to go back and redo the presentation. I want to rewrite things and redo it and take certain things out and add different things in. But I think I'll probably go, rather than, because I'm going to overanalyze myself if I do that. So I'll probably just go ahead and upload it raw as is, and then do it again and upload that one too. I don't know.
Add to be revised.
Yeah. Well, I think hopefully, I don't know, shoot, I don't think I recorded the beginning part, so I'll record it now here at the end, the caveat that, this is, we're learning together, right? This is just my humble attempt at trying to distill some things that I've come to know that I thought might be helpful. But, it's a work in progress. And what excites me is being in that process and and being on that journey together, and never feeling like, I've become so less interested in answers, right, in my journey, and really fascinated by questions. And so I'm more driven by the idea to kind of sit in these same questions, with an ever expanding, group of people with the diversity of experiences and perspectives. That's what I find exciting about education. So yeah. Work in progress, always.
It would be called a what's possible? Is that what you would entitle it?
Yeah.
Okay.
The one question that comes to me is, and maybe it's something we should talk about separately, but I'm wondering where to even begin to look for resources, to find courses. If I know that there are certain things I can teach and certain things I'm not prepared to teach.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just overwhelming because it's like the entire world is available online.
Yeah.
So it makes it hard to know where to begin.
Yeah. I can share with you, I have a shared Google Doc that the co-op that I belong to began creating. And that was, as people found cool stuff, I just compiled it all in one document that's organized sort of by subject area. And again, it's no, official endorsement. It's just sort of a place where we kept everything so we didn't have to sift through thousands of emails to be like, what was that one math website you talked about? So I can share that with you as a place to start, to sort of stimulate some ideas. But again, and then also, in next time, in developing a session to share sort of what I'm thinking about for the fall in particular in ways that might be helpful. And also, again, just sitting down and thinking a little bit through an exercise that I found is helpful, and I can actually share. I can email you a blank one of these. It might not show up, but this is sort of, it's not going to show up. This is a Monday through Sunday, 7:30 a.m. to 1 a.m., table that I just sort of sit down and think through, how do we want to spend our time? What are those things that we don't control, that we do, we have to do at certain times and certain days? And other than that, how do we want to spend our time? Does your kid have a particular interest? And again, knowing that it can change week to week or month to month, and like one of the ideas, like with project-based learning, is sort of like a kid just does one sort of project at a time for a length of time. Like maybe they're really into, the ancient tools and weaponry of the Catawba Indians here in North Carolina, where, on whose land I live currently, right? And they want to really take a deep dive in that. And so you don't even have to create a schedule. You just like, this is what we're working on this week, and you can, anyway, the resources that you need to make that happen are gonna be driven by, the purpose you have and the goals you have. And there may be goals that you want to have as a family. There may be goals that you have for your children. There may be goals that you want to encourage your children to set for themselves. There may be various levels to these goals. But whatever it is you're hoping to accomplish, once you understand that, then start to look for what resources might make that possible. Because otherwise, you'll get, it's really easy to get lost in a sea of things. And I've done that before. I have a whole garage full. You're welcome to come over and explore. I have a whole garage full of curriculum, textbooks, materials, science plays, because I would get excited about something and I'd buy a curriculum that I thought was cool and was going to be so awesome to use. And then, I gave it to my daughter and she's like, I hate this. I can't relate to it at all. I don't understand what they're asking for. It makes me so upset. And I'd be like, So starting instead, I should have started instead with a conversation with her about, her own writing process, and then find ways, that support that, and maybe she would have come around to the curriculum after having that kind of engagement. Anyway, that's probably not helpful because it goes back to the kind of blank slate. But I would encourage you to start with the goals that you have, and you don't even think in terms of the year, maybe, right? Just think of these next 3 months, right? What do we want to have happen in these next 3 months? And then, and I'm happy to have a more lengthy conversation with you about, based on what you want to have happen in these next 3 months, what are some good resources that might help make that happen? And maybe it's a combination of, getting resources from here, making your own, collaborating with another family, you can, each goal you have might have its own different approach, right, to resources. So
we're going to have to hop off.
yes,
So I want to say thank you.
Thank you guys. And again, I remain available and excited to be on this journey with you. So feel free to reach out for if there's any other questions at all you have.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your time. Yeah.
Thank you. This was wonderful, wonderful, Lee. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know how to